The Everlasting Mud. It is December 19th, 1916, and we have been at Réaucourt 4 months. Our barrack is full, and at last we have arranged the 2 stoves so that they do not smoke us out. 4 weeks we endured it, and went about sooty, with all our clothes and underclothes sooty, but now the draught goes up the chimney instead of down, and when we can beg, buy, or steal wood, we can even get the place warm for an hour or 2. Coal has to be bought in sacks, at 90 francs a ton, but it chiefly consists of dust and heavy stones. Our chief enemy is the mud. The hut where we sleep is in a field, and all around it is mud. Sometimes it is convenient to wear long rubber boots, but the difficulty is to keep them on. They are impossible for a full day's work, as the mud jerks convulsively at your heels with every step, and if you sit down and rest, your feet begin to freeze in 5 minutes, and they are exceedingly tiring to endure more than for an hour or 2, even with a thick stocking inside. Most of us wear boots and leather leggings, and some of the most sensible wooden sabots. Sabots are rather in the nature of an acquired art, but they have the merits of being cheap, warm, and easy to shake off. A long time ago we were promised wooden trellis walks from the barrack to the mess tent, and diligently we set to work to prepare for them. We even made preliminary paths of stone collected from all parts of the fields. But, like many things that have been promised to us, these wooden walks, which one sees at every camp around, have never arrived. We slither about in a sea of mud, bury our feet in it, and drag it all over our sleeping quarters, and curse it all day and every day. A repair car and 3 English mechanics are coming out to us. We have expected them for 5 months. 7 members have left us, 5 because they couldn't stick it, the others because they were not sufficiently fit physically. It isn't really very easy to stick. A few are on leave, and in consequence the remainder are having more work than usual. Every 30 hours out of 48 one is, so to speak, not at home, often sleeping in a dugout or in an old barn close up. After preparing one's car and cleaning oneself, there isn't much time left before the next expedition begins. The French have done another big thing at Verdun, and once again we are not in it. Is it our fate to stay at this damp, dismal little Réaucourt forever? It would almost seem so. Since the early days of Verdun, things have changed very much. The French ambulance convoys are now plentiful and well organized. I am beginning to have a suspicion that we are no longer wanted. The work we have to do is dull and unimportant. We do it all right, but nobody says thank you, or apparently takes any interest in us. The really important things are the football matches, for which we have become famous, and our little racing game, which amuses quite a large section of the convoy, 2 or 3 times a week. Oh yes, we have got the croix on our cars, and several members also on their breasts. I grant that, but it all happened quite a long time ago, and now we are stuck by the heels in the mud at Réaucourt. At 3 a.m. this morning I awoke to listen to the guns. There is one monster somewhere around, and I could hear the whistling of the shells. At 7 I crawled out of my sleeping bag to find ice in my basin. With difficulty I cleaned out the stove and lighted the fire with liberal doses of paraffin, and packed up my things for the next 24 hours. a cup of hot coffee and some bread and butter and jam in the tent, and then the work of starting up my car after a night's severe frost. A dope or two of essence in the cylinders, 2 or 3 convulsive coughs, and the engine starts all right. It is always a relief when she takes hold. Then about 3/4 of an hour's run to Briseau, passing columns of infantry and convoys of ammunition. Briseau is a new hospital, about 1/20th full. There is very little to do there. The car stands idle 22 hours out of 24. We have a little room about 8 feet square. There is no possibility of a fire. The thermometer shows about 15 degrees of frost. Pleasant, isn't it? What is one to do? The usual practice is to take a Primus stove and keep oneself not quite cold by its means, and incidentally cook one's meals. We have been promised other quarters. These are only temporary. I know those promises and think temporary really means for 3 years or the duration of the war. So, for a chilly night, unwashed and unkept, and the consciousness that one is doing one's duty, my 6 months are up on February 21st. Shall I come back? Camp d'Hervin. I thought Briseau was the limit, but since then I have been to d'Hervin. It is a post up in the woods. One solitary car finds its way up there by a long roundabout route through villages in the most picturesque state of demolition. Auzeville, with its battered, brown-tiled roofs and general signs of long and continuous bombardment, is far more picturesque than even Clermont. It has been bombarded without being destroyed, and its coloring and raggedness are most artistic. All the country around this district is honeycombed with big and little burrows, shelters from the Boche shells. There are great caves near the railway line, and further up thousands of little holes for the human rabbits that abide there. It has been my fate to sample many kinds of dugouts, but that at d'Hervin, a steep, greasy staircase with slimy walls growing narrower and narrower until you can only just squeeze in, and then the apartment. It is about 7 feet long by 5 feet wide. In the left-hand corner is a huge stove with a heap of damp firewood lying around it. This stove takes up about 1/4 of the space. The floor is boarded, but exceedingly dirty. Opposite the entrance are 2 bunks covered with dirty straw. You cannot stand upright without hitting your head against the muddy roof. Water exudes from that roof all day and night in big, dirty drops. There is always a pool of muddy slime in the middle of the room. The rats fight their battles at night-time around that pool. I don't mind the rats, but the noise is disturbing. I gave my aide the choice of sleeping in the car or the dugout. There wasn't room for 2 of us. He wisely chose the car. A thaw had set in and everything was heavy with mud. I had forgotten my pipe, and my Primus lamp refused to work. The underberth was not quite so damp as the upper one. After many attempts, the stove burnt and filled the place with smoke, but anyhow it dried it up a little. Then I slept not badly, disturbed only by the noise of the rats, and rats are very noisy, and by a few German shells singing overhead. But what a life at 2.5 pence a day! Up above that dugout there is a road, very close to the German trenches, within 70 yards, I was told, leading to a little poste de secours. Our cars can go there only by night. The trees all around are close cropped by the mitrailleuse. There has been much fighting in this little hole, and war in all its dreadful ugliness has blighted the face of this fair forest, and scarred the landscape like a malicious pestilence. It is all ugly, sordid, and dirty. Down the side of the hill 4 men carry a brancard. Behind the stretcher walk 2 soldiers, slightly wounded. It is our load for the day. We are lucky in having no night work. Our 2.5 pence. We work here for the cause. Our enthusiasm carries us through, and it is well that enthusiasm exists. In return for our services, an expenditure of £2 to £3 a week, the whole cost of uniform and kit, and in many cases the free gift of a motor car, we are allowed to come out here and serve the French government with the status of privates, and for the magnificent sum of 2.5 pence a day. Some of us endeavoured at first in a spirit of princely generosity to refuse that 2.5 pence. We felt that after having spent so much, it would be a pity to ruin the effect by accepting that 18 pence a week. We graciously waved it aside and made a present of it to the French government. But alas, our intentions were misunderstood. The officials evidently could not believe we could be so generous. That 2.5 pence pursued us. Reams of letters were written on the subject. The work of the section stood still. Even the organization threatened to collapse. Mighty and distinguished officials visited us, and we were entreated almost with tears to reconsider the matter. For the time being, it was more important than the submarine problem or the attitude of Tino. Eventually, we gave way. We had to. The whole force of the French administration was opposed to us. After that, I remember our officers smiled once more, and the look of anxious depression left the faces of the bureau clerks. For 2.5 pence a day and rations, supplemented by our own expenditure of £2 to £3 a week per head, we bind ourselves for 6 months at a time to work how, when, and where the French authorities may determine. We sleep in dirty barns or in dirtier dugouts, in a wooden barrack so constructed as to afford us the maximum of air and dampness with the minimum of warmth. Like ducks, we waddle in the mud, spreading it over our sleeping quarters and mess tent. We are always cold and very often wet. We work night and day, often under shell fire, and sometimes under very difficult conditions. Nobody shirks, very rarely is anyone late, and cars are not the most tractable of starters. It matters not at all if our officers are there or not. The work is done for the cause. In London, the organization that engages us gets our names to a contract and sends us out, seems then to entirely wash its hands of us, provided only that it gets our cars and we do not get into trouble with the French administration. If that happens, it is most regrettable, most regrettable. Above all, no friction. Right or wrong, friction is to be avoided. Do whatever we are told. Never protest. Any senior officer can drive and possibly wreck our cars. He may never have driven before, but to object would be to create friction, and friction is horrid. It has gradually been borne in upon us that we must never look to London for any help in difficulties, and so we have learnt to help ourselves. For the 2 long years the convoy has been working, never once have the people responsible for us come out. And how we have longed for them, a night or two in the dugout at Camp d'Ervin. just a week of our winter conditions. Alas, they are too busy, and so new men continue to join unprovided with the details they most need, and many of them say quite rude things in consequence. We get 7 days leave every 3 months, and 15 every 6 if we wish to stay on. It is strange that people do wish to stay on. In spite of the peculiar ways of the committee and the somewhat rotten organization here, they stay. It is not for the comfort, or the pay, or the encouragement and consideration in London, or even at the front. It is not for the glory of war, for all the glamour has long since worn off. It is for the cause alone. It is something to have given freely of one's means, to have given all one's time, to have shared in the privations of the ordinary soldier, to have endured the often excessive strain of driving in the absolute blackness of night, to have faced shell fire innumerable times and almost learnt to like it. It is something to have been unable to sleep because one's feet were so bitterly cold, to have to thaw one's hands to get back the feeling of touch, to have covered oneself repeatedly with oil and grease. It is something to have carried a good many thousands of wounded or sick, long or short journeys to hospitals. It is good to have gone through it all, to have seen the rottenness of some things, the glaring stupidity and flabby incompetence of others, and to have stuck to it contented, occasionally almost happy, even. The truth is the cause is good, and the workers are necessarily of the right sort. They understand and appreciate each other and each other's work. So they endure and go on. The winter of 1916-17. 20 degrees of frost, my hands numb, with no feeling in the fingers, my feet painfully cold, wrapped up to the eyes, driving an ambulance car without a screen through a blizzard of freezing east wind and fine driving snow. Phew! The end of January was cold. Our barracks let all the breezes through. At 3 a.m. it was too cold to sleep. One would have been just as warm outside. I had one long day just before we moved evacuating from Réaucourt. We had 7 or 8 journeys, and got frozen on each. If we were away more than an hour or so, our stove went out. I find cold accumulates. After a day of this kind, one needs not only to warm oneself, but to soak in warmth for an hour or two until it penetrates to the bones. We ran about 240 kilometers that day, and carried 29 cases, and to finish up were called out just after a late homemade dinner to tow a broken-down car back to Réaucourt. Then we ran short of petrol for the second time. On the 27th of January we moved, and glad we were to say goodbye to the mud and cold and dull days of Réaucourt. We were going to Glorieux, a suburb of Verdun. Hurrah! We were all of us delighted. It may mean hard work, but it is what we came out for. Verdun. The frost continues, but the sun shines, and we are having a few days' repose. Alas, no work. I have been all over Verdun with my camera. The city is practically uninhabited and half in ruins, but it has not been demolished, and the ruins are picturesque. The cathedral, never a beautiful building, has been damaged, but not irreparably. Its 2 towers stand untouched, and all the structural works appear to be whole. 1 or 2 corners of the city have suffered severely, and tier after tier of half-demolished houses with, in some cases, just enough standing to support their roofs, present a very interesting picture. I saw in the distance our old haunts in the early days of the German attack, when shells were not only continually falling in Verdun itself, but in all the district around within a radius of 5 miles. Things seem very quiet now. The French guns are often busy, but so far there has been little or no German response. I doubt whether Verdun itself will suffer much more. The Boches, in their usual way, when they found they could not take the place, did their level best to ruin it. They hated it cordially for several days with many big guns. Now they are a mile or so further away, and the offensive has changed very successfully to the French. Still waiting. Alas, we have been at Verdun for 4 weeks. Very cold weeks, with the thermometer ranging from 20 to 40.5 degrees Fahrenheit of frost. Happily for us, but also to our disappointment, we have been doing nothing. Our cars, with the exception of 2 or 3 a day, have stood with radiators empty and oil congealed. Nearly all the work here is done at night, and it is lucky not only for us, but for our buses that there is very little doing. It is the weather of a hard winter at St. Moritz, with brilliant sunshine in the day, but too often with a bitter, piercing east wind. One day when I ran back to Ravigny, my radiator froze on the way. Imagine waiting at a poste de secours under these conditions. The difficulty of keeping oneself from freezing stiff, to say nothing of the complications that may happen to the car. We have made our barracks at Glorieux warm and comfortable. We are more or less content, but there is nothing to do. Once or twice we have wandered into forbidden spots, and been politely but firmly arrested. On 2 or 3 occasions the guns have suddenly begun to talk, and we have climbed the hill beyond to watch the fireworks. Every night the Germans send a few shells over us, and now and then into Verdun. This is our only relaxation. We are waiting for the ball to begin. Personally, I shall have waited my 6 months in another 10 days, and if nothing lifts us out of our peaceful repose, it will be a case of home sweet home. It is interesting to see Verdun again, and to take photos where one likes, but one might as well be, bar the cold, at the Riviera. No, we had very little to do at Verdun. Our only excitement was the occasional whistle of a shell over us at night. To me it was interesting because I knew those shells must have come from at least 7 miles away. Their objective was the road about 800 yards off. Now, a mistake of 800 yards in 7 miles isn't much, but it might have meant a good deal to us. So it is with great pleasure I give a testimonial to the German gunners for the consistency of their long-range fire. Not a single shell over our quarters fell short.